it's a pleasure to see so many faces here. Might I say, I can see there are a few new ones here physically, and no doubt there might be a few new ones online. So a welcome from me and all of Bridge Street Fellowship to all of you. You might not be aware, but this morning we have people from Seven Hills, we have people from Sylvania, and would you believe it, we have people from Switzerland. Peter, are you in there? Hope he is. Right. Well, delightful to see your cheery face, and no doubt hopefully refreshing yourself well. Now, I think the thing is that for those that haven't been here before, what's important to note that Bridge Street Fellowship is available to all men, regardless of your background, your wealth, your beliefs, whatever. We welcome you. And it's been going for a considerable amount of time, but we explore the relevance of faith in one person's life. And we do this by hearing stories from people whose names are very well known to you, and from others that you've never heard of. We've been blessed with having Warwick Fairfax from New York, telling us about the Fairfax ups and downs and his own personal decline in value and self-worth. For myself, I'd have to say the interaction between faith, life and works for me, and through it I've developed many friendships, learned heaps of lessons, the results of which is that my wife says I seem to be a better person and a better husband. Now, before handing over to an esteemed member in Robert Dunn, I will actually just give a little brief rundown on our own speaker today, Oliver Greeves. Now, Oliver, first of all, has played an instrumental role in the commencement and operation of Bridge Street Fellowship, both here in Sydney and developing fellowships throughout cities in Australia. He's had the distinction and the luck, or he's been kicked out of 4 continents, where he actually excelled in principally banking, where he actually rose to certain roles, including the regional director in Australia for JP Morgan Chase, and also had a role as president of MetLife. So think Oliver, banking, insurance. He's also, you might not know, an author. And one of his books, his first book of many, I presume, is Nelson's Folly, which is based on the wife of Horatio Nelson. It's a fantastic read, and it's going to be followed up with 1 or 2 others if he gets time and God willing. Myself, I've read the book, and I have to say, I was a bit slow on comprehension. It took me 5 pages to work out, oh, we're talking about Horatio Nelson. But once you get into it, it's a fantastic read. And Oliver, despite what you might think, is one of my best mates, surprisingly, regularly still beating me at golf. So with that, I'll invite Robert to provide the interview.
Thank you, Ian. Well, Oliver, today we unpeel the real Oliver Greeves. You describe yourself in your LinkedIn profile as leadership coach, historical author and speaker. Would you like to tell us about that?
Yes, well, I'm speaking. Yes, I'm a leadership coach. You'll hear a bit more about my earlier career, but when I came to Australia, I co-founded a company called Pharos Institute with Wade Asme, who some of you know. And we are in the business of leadership coaching. I speak to a lot of senior men and sometimes women too, help them to improve their performance, increase their self-understanding and be better people. So that's very fulfilling, and I can't say I'm making a mint out of it, but it's a very good business if you like that sort of thing. As to the authoring, that's started off as really as a hobby. Throughout my career, I've been interested in writing, and I'll just mention that in the many years I lived in New York, and I lived in New York altogether for 20 years, I always found time to attend a writer's hub or school called the New School down in Greenwich Village, which is one of the great sort of writing centers in New York, and attended all sorts of workshops and was invited to participate in others. And so that skilled me up in terms of writing. When I came back here, I took a workshop here, and out of that workshop, a group of writers emerged, all men, 7 of us, and we're all writing books. And I started writing a novel for the first time, and so that's what become Nelson's Folly, and there's a few copies out here. You're free to take one. They usually go for about $20, but if you haven't got $20, that's all right. So whatever, cash only.
Now, you told me you had an interesting childhood. Do you want to tell us about growing up? Where did you grow up, and why was it interesting?
Years to sort of come to terms with my childhood and what happened and who I was and who my parents were. But I've gradually got more perspective on it. I think this is actually a good exercise for everybody. It was an unusual childhood in the sense that my parents came from very different backgrounds. And the family they created and where we were, especially in relation to their Christian belief, was also pretty odd, I have to say. And it affected me, affected the way I think and so on. So the story is that on my father's side, they were Scots-Irish. If you know the Scots-Irish are, they live in Ulster in Northern Ireland. And they were a very, very wealthy family, especially in the 19th century. They had the largest flax spinning mill in the world, and they drove around in Rolls Royces and had big houses in the country and that sort of thing. By the time they got to my father's generation, they weren't quite as wealthy, but they were still pretty up there. And but my father really took a real dislike to the whole thing, because his father had lost most of his money in the crash of 1920s. And so if you're on Struggle Street after being part of a big family, it's sort of difficult. So I grew up visiting these grand relatives in Ireland, and so it had a, we were very modest means, living in Birmingham in England, and so that was one element. The other element was that my mother came from Iceland. And Iceland is, in the North Atlantic there, very small population. And she came from a very small place in the very far north. And it was very hard. And she had some great losses when she was young. My grandfather was drowned at sea, leaving 10 children. And so, she came from that sort of background, and her faith was very grounded in how to get through life when things really get very bad. So they met in England during the war. My mother was studying at London University. She couldn't get back home when the war started. And my father was working with an engineering apprenticeship at the Austin Motor Company in Birmingham. And they met, got married. They were introduced. My father came from a background, they were originally Quakers, but they became Plymouth Brethren. And so my parents and I grew up in the Plymouth Brethren, in the more exclusive variety of the Plymouth Brethren. And the doctrines that they had were all about separation from the world, and keep the world at arm's length. Don't get mixed in that dirty place. And they had all sorts of rules around that practically meant that I felt very isolated. We had no radio, we had no television. We never went to the movies. And, even though I went to public schools and so on, regular schools, I felt like, I'm living in a different world. And it's very isolating for a child to feel that, I think. And most of all, I felt that there was a real doctrinal belief in God as a judge, that you are being judged. And that sort of is very depressing to think about all the time, and to hear that again and again and again. You're being judged, and you better watch out because there's somewhere you might go. And so I grew up with that sort of. And then when I was in my teens, the whole thing blew up. I mean, somebody got into a position of authority in this particular little church, and he started making it even more extreme and breaking up families. And my mother saw it coming, and she told my father, "Look, we're out of here." And so they left, and they had, all their friends were all at this little church, their whole friendship, all their networks and so on. They lost a lot, in mid-career. And for me, it was like, thank goodness, I'm out of here. And but for them, it was devastating, and I that shaped me. Basically, I'd walked away from Christianity at that point because that was my experience of it.
Yeah. Did that make you want to rebel, strike out on your own, do your own thing?
It certainly did. It certainly did. I mean, I think the week after they left the Plymouth Brethren, I went straight to the movies on my own. Yeah, and I can even remember the movie. It was Sweet Bird of Youth by Tennessee Williams.
At least you waited. It was, so how did that play out? You went to university.
Yeah, because
happened
as I say, we were modest means and so on. I quickly just was quite ambitious, and I worked very, very hard, and I got good grades, and I graduated, went to a good university, and then for want of anything better to do, I went on to do a PhD and so on. So yeah.
In economic history.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. You don't refer to yourself as Dr. Greeves.
No.
Not even in the book.
No, because if you go and work for an American organization and you go around saying I'm Dr. this or I'm Dr. that, I mean, people look at you. Okay. You don't want to do that.
Is that also your position against exclusivity?
It might be. I might be. I just don't think it's that important.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
It was fun to do.
Okay. Economic history.
Yeah.
Okay. And then how did you go from there? What job does that lead to?
Well, then I moved into remember by that time I got married. My wife she also had a PhD in chemistry, a much more relevant subject. And so we were married, we were living in London, and I just finished my PhD and I was looking to decide what to do. And I decided I didn't want to be an academic. And so walking down the road, and she said, well, what do you want to do? And I said, well, you know what? I really would like to travel the world. She said, travel the world? Yeah. I said, well, I want to travel the world, but I want to do it with someone else paying for it. This is literal conversation. It's very embarrassing, actually. But she said, well, how are you going to do that? I said, no, I'm going to have to look around. So I started looking around and various international jobs. And there was, in that time in London, the city was expanding rapidly. The American banks were growing there, and they were becoming very powerful. And they were developing networks around the world, and they didn't have anybody to go there because the Americans wanted to stay in America. So they quickly found that there were these Brits who were eager to travel. And so that's how I joined, and went through their training program, and pretty soon I was in New York.
And so you worked in New York for a while?
Yeah, they started training in London, finished the training in New York, and had a short-term job there. And then I came to Australia. So
Australia and other countries too.
Yeah, I was here in the early 70s. And I remember the 70s quite well here in Sydney, but I won't be distracted by that. It's another story. And then...
It's good you can remember.
Yeah, exactly. One of our competitors, by the way, here was the company that became Macquarie Bank. It was interesting. They were nothing. They're just little pinprick. So yeah, I did a good enough job here that they wanted me to work elsewhere. So they exported me to set up a bank in Malaysia.
Oh.
And then I did that for a few years, and then I went to Korea.
And how old were you at this stage?
Well, I was about 30 thereabouts. By the time I was finished in Malaysia, I was maybe 31, 32, something like that.
And Korea got interesting for you.
Yeah, it was. I think I got the job because nobody else wanted it. In those days, Korea was regarded as a very difficult assignment.
It wasn't a wealthy country, was it?
No, it was up and coming. The dictator who ran Korea had really created something of a miracle in terms of building infrastructure and getting the companies and the banks moving to build Korea. And he was basically following the example given by Japan. And so the whole place was really bustling, and it was firing on all cylinders, and they needed foreign capital. And we were the leading bank there, and we rapidly built up a business, probably had you know, at the height of the time I was there, $5 or $6 billion worth of risk in the form of, we did a lot of short-term bill discounting, commercial paper, which we sold in New York. And we were also the leading loan syndicator. So we raised money for the Korean electrification industry. You know, they went nuclear, and we financed and organized the financing for their big nuclear program. We financed planes, you know, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. And there was then a revolution, and you were in it.
Yeah, I mean, this is all going along very nicely, and well, it was, you know, it was like riding a racehorse or something. It was going so fast, and sort of zany world. And then woke up one morning, there were tanks on the streets, you know, and the president had been assassinated by his bodyguard, and then they were all heavily into a big poker game or something, which went wrong, and they'd obviously been consuming large amounts of soju, and you know, he was dead. And what then? You know, what do you do if the dictator goes? There isn't a sort of a deputy dictator. So people were calling from New York saying, well, you know, what about our money? You know, is it safe over there?
So how long were you there sort of sorting that out?
Well, that all lasted about a year, during which they sort of had a temporary government, and then there was a putsch. I don't know whether you know that word, putsch. It always refers to the army taking over. So they seized control. One particular guy seized control, Chun. He was the general in charge of Seoul. And the tanks came out the streets again. And it was very swift and clever the way he did it, actually. He just created a gigantic traffic jam so that the rest of the army couldn't get at him. They had no choice but to negotiate with him. So he became the dictator. And I remember I was on the American Chamber of Commerce board, and the ambassador at that time, the American ambassador, Gleistein, was obviously caught up in the middle of this because, you know, there's a huge number of American troops there. There's a risk of war from North Korea. And so the Americans were very, very worried. And you know, he used to brief us because he wanted the business community to maintain confidence, and he wanted to know what the business community was thinking. So he would meet like around a table like this. The governors would sit around the table, and he would tell us what was going on. And at one point, somebody said to him, "Well, Mr. Ambassador, what's this new general like?" Because nobody knew him. "What's he like?" And he'd obviously been up late, and he was tired, and fed up and angry. And he said, "He's a greasy-haired, jackbooted son of a bitch," quote unquote. Okay. Well, I remembered that. I remembered that because about a year and a half later, I was in New York at a function in which he'd been recognized as a deal had been done with the Americans, and he was recognized subject to blah, blah, blah. And so David Rockefeller put on an event for him at one of the famous clubs in New York, and he was there, and all these other people were there, and Gleistein was there, right? And this time it was, "Your Excellency."
So I gather you did all the necessary, and the bank didn't hose all the money. And,
no.
And so your star was rising. You were young, doing these adventures like the guy you wrote the book about, or partly about. You know, adventures in the world.
That's right.
As a young guy, it couldn't be better, right? It just went on and on.
Well,
what happened?
Yes and no. You know, I'd had several assignments adjacent, one after the other, which were really high stress sort of assignments. Starting up a bank is not easy in a place like Malaysia, and there were all sorts of issues there. There's things that went on in Korea and so on. So I arrived in New York, and once again, I was confronting a really difficult situation because I took over this industry group, which was the capital goods industry, the heavy industry, the big companies. and their credit was threatened by, the rising interest environment. And if you remember, at one point, interest rates got up to like 17%. And this crushed these companies because they relied on all this credit to support their inventories and their manufacturing and their receivables and so on. And so I was having to sort of make sense of all this. And they were tottering. One of them actually did collapse, which was International Harvester. We were one of the lead banks, and they had 200,000 workers, around the world. And it was a very, very big company in the agricultural equipment and trucking business. And they, were on the point of collapse, and we had to sort of get involved with that. And it's very worrying to sort of make sure the bank's credit is managed very carefully. And it's a totally different relationship when you've got a company in trouble. And so all of this on top of this year of being, I just felt like, what is this all about? How can I deal with this? Why am I doing this? I sort of started asking those questions.
Okay, and were you alone? Were you asking those questions into the night, the darkness of the night, or were there people around you?
No, I was pretty much alone. My wife was away; she was in England for a few weeks, and I was on my own. Yeah, and believe me, the New Yorkers that I was responsible for or worked with, their attitude was not exactly welcoming. It was like, who is this guy? You can see why I don't use the word doctor, right? Who is this guy? He's come from Korea to run our blue chip division.
Yeah. So how did what happened? Were you thinking about God in those times and purpose?
Well, I was certainly feeling the pressure. I had sort of kept a very remote relationship with what you might call religion. I got two girls by that time, 2 daughters, and I took them to church occasionally, but basically no. And so, but at that point where this sort of stress was at its highest, and I began to feel the meaninglessness and my own inadequacies, really, I sort of decided to give it a shot. And so one evening I was on my own in an apartment on the east side. I just got down on my knees and said, God, if you're there, why don't you show yourself to me? And if you do, I will take the next step. I will take you seriously, and I will pursue and seek to know more about you. And having made that prayer, I went to bed, and I woke up feeling extremely loved. It was an extraordinary feeling. I felt like all this stress. Some of my more skeptical friends said, well, you had a good night's sleep. But no, it was much more than that. It was much more than that. I was talking to someone the other day, it was a reversal of this picture of God that had been painted into me as a young boy, of a judgmental, criticizing, mean kind of person or abstract person who was going to throw me into hell. That all sort of melted away when I realized, no, God is love, and he wants to be your friend. He wants to be part of your life and be with you,
Wow. So what happened after that? How did that, you've got this new sense of relief.
Right.
What happened?
Well, then I started thinking, okay, I made a bit of a bargain here. I better live up to my side of it. So I started looking around, and I called up a friend who lived in Melbourne, actually, and he told me sometime before that he'd had something of an experience like this. And he was a Catholic guy, and he said, well, Oliver, what you need to do is you need to find a good church. You need to find some friends who can explain things to you and be a friend to you, and you need a spiritual director. That's a sort of a Catholic term. But what it really means is, as far as I'm concerned, is you need someone to explain to you how to walk the Christian life. And so I started looking for those things, and sincerely and honestly, and God led me to 3 incredible people who proceeded to do just that.
Okay, how did that work out? What happened?
Well, first person that I found was we bought a house out in New Jersey, and I started looking around for a decent church. I found a lot of really useless churches. Finally, I found this one where the preaching seemed to be good, but I was not at all enamored with the people that went there. They were to me like very milquetoast, Protestant sort of, suburban people. So I just used to go into the church, listen to the sermon, always good, and get the hell out. And I used to take my children, leave them in the Sunday school, get them out.
Not what you'd call fellowship.
No. So one day when I'm going out, the pastor sort of gets me by the arm and says, "Oliver, come here." And I said, "What?" And he says, "Could you get up early on a Saturday morning?" And I said, "Well, maybe. What you got in mind?" He said, "Well, I get together with a small group of men and we talk about what I'm going to preach the next day. And we only do it for about 10 minutes. And then we go and have breakfast at the local Greasy Spoon. Would you be up for that?" Yeah, okay. Because I'd made this sort of vow that I would be responsive. So that was the beginning of a relationship I had with that man, but more importantly with the group of these fairly harmless people, business people and whatever. And I realized, hey, they're not so bad, and then maybe, Oliver, it's you that's got the problem, So that was the first one. Yeah.
Yeah. And you mentioned a week or two ago about BJ Weber.
Yeah.
How did he come into your life?
Okay, so there was two other people who had a big influence in my life. We're going to go fast forward here a bit because I moved initially to Hong Kong. I got to know a guy called Li Yi, and Li Yi was a Chinese American, very charismatic guy, worked for Goldman Sachs. He was big deal, high net worth broker, and cheeky kind of a guy. And he also had been trained as a minister at Dallas Theological Seminary, and he was sort of associated with a group which is known as the Navigators. And anyway, he preached at this church that I was going to in Hong Kong, and I really liked what he had to say. So I went up to him afterwards and I said, "Look, could I sort of study with you a bit? I need to improve my knowledge and so on." So he said, "Yeah, maybe." I said, "Okay, what's the maybe?" He says, "Well, you could do something for me." He said, "Here's the deal. You ask 6 of your non-Christian friends to go to your house and you tell them what you believe. And if you do that, you can come and study with me." Like, what? You trying to get me to commit suicide? Well, that was Li Yi. So BJ Weber,
which you did, right?
I did, and I studied with him with another group of men, and it was a wonderful period of time. And when I left Hong Kong, the very first day I arrived in New York, somebody gave me this guy's name, and I called him up and met him. And again, it was like, God brings these people into your lives as long as you're willing to, don't hold back, go forward. So I met BJ, and BJ immediately welcomed me into his little group, and I soon after joined his board. And he was totally different from Li Yi. Well, he was the same kind of person in the sense that he was just as cheeky as Lee was, but he was like somebody who'd been a hippie and completely changed his mind, became a Christian at a Catholic monastery, and then was working with the poor in New York. And by the time I got there, he had this sort of established group of people doing all sorts of things. And mainly he was involved in helping people who were suffering, particularly men. He was really dedicated to getting involved with people who'd lost their jobs or had lost their fortune, lost their wives, and he would get alongside them and raise them up and so on. So I became part of that fellowship.
And is that, you've mentioned to me you became part of the New York Fellowship. That's made
right.
me think of the forerunner to this.
It was.
It
was a forerunner. It was a bit less structured. It was a bit more, we did all sorts of things together, but we were very definitely a community like this one is. And we would go away together and like we do and so on. We'd have a great fellowship. And we went through all sorts of experiences, just amazing. Some of them wonderful, some of them very sad. And so I had this sort of, involvement.
Band of brothers?
It's sort of a band of brothers, but I remember what Li Yi told me once. He said, you know, Oliver, if you've got the willing, and God knows that, you know what? He'll cut you in a piece of the action. I really like that. I told that to Walter the other day. He liked that. It's like, okay, here's 5%. Okay. And that's what it felt like.
Yeah. So from really early success to very tough challenges to a sort of a re-flourishing.
That's right.
To, it sounds great, but more challenges coming.
Yeah, I mean, life throws up these challenges, and you can't get away from them. But I think one of the more challenging things that happened to me was in 1994 when my wife Diane, that I'd been married to for 20 odd years, suddenly took sick, and she got a cough, and then this cough got worse, and she went to all sorts of specialists, and they finally told her the bad news that she had a sort of unusual form of lung cancer. And when you hear that, I mean, it's usually, that's like a 6-month sentence, but she actually lived for about 2 years. And so that was very difficult.
And were you in New York at that time?
We were in New York. Yeah. She had surgery, but the surgery didn't really do anything. But the really important thing, I began to feel like all these years I've left Diane alone because she didn't sign up when she married me. She didn't sign up to be a Christian. So I never sort of put her under any pressure or anything. But I said to her one day, and I said to her, Diane, you know, really, you know, you're faced with some difficult situation here. It's time for you to really reconsider. And she said, I already have. And she told me that while I was away, when she got this diagnosis and I was away traveling, she'd actually thought she might commit suicide. And then she thought, no, I'm not going to do that because that's really bad for the family. And she said that she really cried out herself. And again, she had this feeling of warmth and reassurance and love. And so she became a Christian, not sort of great theologically, whatever, but yeah, and it made a huge impact on me and huge impact on my daughters.
Wonderful, wonderful. I mean, I think that whole that's the real part of it, right? Just
yeah.
I think the hardest thing for many of us is to understand that God likes us and loves us,
That's right.
and wants good stuff for us.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh wow, sad. So I guess that fellowship was an important part of helping you through that.
It was, and I wasn't the only person who got a great deal of help during that period. And I continued to be part of that fellowship. And then eventually, BJ said to me a few years later, he said, look, do you want to go out and see, you know, get back to normal, meet some women? BJ always went straight to the point. And I said, you know, I'm open to that, you know. And so he proceeded to set me up with a couple of people. And, you know, if you get set up late in life, it's a horrifying experience, you know, because, you know, when you're young, it's like the man is the one who's the aggressive one, who's like, you know, trying to sort of get to meet this woman and blah, blah, blah. But when you get to a little older, it's the other way around. And they're like, oh, that was a nice date. When are we going to get married? And but anyway, they introduced me to Suzanne, and Suzanne wasn't a bit like that. She was a lovely woman, and we subsequently got married, and we had another daughter.
In New York? In
New York, yeah.
Okay, great. And then you somehow come to Australia, or come back to Australia?
Yeah, I was in New York during the 9/11, and that had a very major effect on the city and on me and on the company I was working for and so on. So a few years later, there was a restructuring of the company, and they said to me, thanks very much, now piss off, you know. And the way, you know, companies, they've always got a nice way of doing this, haven't they? The fortunate thing in my case was they did say, well, here's a little check, you know, help you along the way. So, but nonetheless, I was really rattled as to where I would go, and I really didn't want to stay in the States, so I came back to Australia.
Nice, excellent. Now, somehow this has all happened. Bridge Street Fellowship is formed. What do you hope for us?
Well, I really, you know, there's the New York Fellowship in the States sort of morphed into New York Fellowship still exists, but there was a derivative, a sort of child of the New York Fellowship called the New Canaan Society, which has got 60 chapters or something like that around the States. And if you're ever in the States, you can always find one of these chapters. So anyway, I came over here and met Peter, and Peter had similar goals and aspirations for Sydney and for, you know, Australia, and we just decided to sort of work it out prayerfully and meet as a small group and just see how it went. And then all sorts of interesting things happened. One of the couple of the founding members of this group sitting right here at the table, and I think they would agree that we had some remarkable experiences, didn't we? And then it began to grow to what it is today. Yeah.
Yeah, and with COVID, international speakers as well.
Yeah,
like you,
right.
Actually, an international speaker. Let's put our hands together for Oliver. Now it's your turn to ask questions. So we've got a good amount of time to go through. Yeah, one over here and online as well.
Oliver, what's been your biggest failure and how have you bounced back? What's been your biggest failure and how have you bounced back from it?
Wow, men never fail. Don't you know that? They can always rationalize it. You know, I don't think I've ever had any real failures. I think I feel I once got involved when I came to Australia first in a development. I was developing retirement villages, and pivotal in these was a long-lasting friend of mine, and he really kind of let this venture down by making friends and associating with people who were less than honest, and so that came back and hit me, and so that cost me a bit of money, but I'm not going to worry too much about that. But that's an example of a failure. But I think the only thing I would say on reflection is, you know, if you're in a sort of a very tough, hard moving career, it's very good to get some coaching, you know, to get some understanding of what's going on from a mentoring and coaching point of view. I think if I'd had that earlier, it would have been very helpful.
Interesting. Other questions? John.
Well, you mentioned coaching and mentoring in the same breath there. What's the difference between the two? What is it that you're doing primarily that differs from the other thing?
Yeah, okay. So coaching is the process whereby you draw out from the coachee what they think of themselves and how they conduct their lives, how they comport themselves. And then you expose them to information, which is usually very scientifically grounded information about who they are and how they're seen by other people. And you say, after having seen this, you sort of say, well, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to change? And if they really think hard and long about it, they'd start to make some changes themselves. It's not me change, it's them making the change. And they grow, and then they're able to influence the people around them differently. And so the whole thing results in a virtuous spiral, and their performance improves. So mentoring, you know, there's really two kinds of mentoring. There's what I'd call sort of questionable mentoring, and there's mentoring which is in a way analogous to coaching. So there's stuff which is, you know, you don't want to get into is associating with someone who you tell your life story to, and they say, if I was you, this is what you should do. Because I did this, I was very successful. And they start to really put their life experiences into your life. And that's sort of interesting, but it's also misleading because they have a very different background, they're different people and so on. So the really good mentoring is when you have conversations about where the individual sits at the moment in their work. So as a coach, I know a lot about people's work because I've been there myself, and I know what happens under those circumstances and so on. So I bring the real life day to day into the coaching conversation through mentoring.
Oliver, lovely to hear you. Lovely to join you, gentlemen, from Amsterdam. Oliver, in your career, you have obviously seen a number of business cycles. You spoke of the time in New York City when interest rates were high. I remember when we were first meeting in your living room, the GFC hit as well. What's your personal feeling in terms of the vagaries of wealth, and how does financial security sit with you?
Right. Well, how does financial security? I think we all need some form of security, and wealth certainly is one form of security. I certainly wouldn't decry the importance of that, as long as it doesn't really make you into a very selfish person. I think the truth of the matter is that if you've been brought up in a market environment, you know that markets go up and they go down, and you know that there's sort of a madness in the crowds, and you know, people charge in one direction, that results in a spiraling of those asset prices, and then there's a realization or an interest rate rise, and everything collapses in a heap. And so I tend to be rather conservative in my investment philosophy, and my philosophy is not just make as much money as I can, but more to try to manage a portfolio which is relatively low risk and is highly diversified. And that way, you don't make a lot of money that you could make, but you know, you provide for your family, you provide for your future, you provide for your retirement. I'm not sure, Peter, that's what you wanted me to that was the kind of answer you wanted, but that's my answer to your question.
And it's good to hear from you, Peter. Ian.
Yeah, Oliver, you wouldn't be the first person that's looked for the door on the first entry into a church and to be pulled back. But it can get worse, I should say, to some people, where you actually get into a small group at the church and you go to the meetings with a small group and you say to God, what on earth have I got in common with these people?
Right.
How do you handle these things?
Well, you know, church, rather like golf, is an exercise in humility. Right. So you could well find yourself in an environment or a small group where you really ask that question, if you're honest with yourself, you know. And the truth of the matter is that you should then say to yourself, well, I'm not so great, you know, what's so special about me, you know, and this is very good that I'm with this, fortunate that I'm with this group of people and that we can do things together, even though, you know, sometimes you really ask yourself, you know, what you're doing there. And, you know, I won't go on.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Oliver, thank you for taking us on a journey. I had no idea some of those things about your life, and the way you opened up your home from day one to a few of us in the room. Thank you for living such a transparent life to allow people to be real. Thank you that this group is a place where men can get real.
Right.
For you, what have been some of the joys in terms of the transformation you've seen in the guys here? And
Right.
what are your hopes for the future with Bridge Street?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I think one of the great joys is when you see people really rock it off. You know, they get the idea and then they just absolutely take off in their spiritual faith or in their work environment or whatever. And I think as a result of being part of this group, and then they subsequently tell you, this made a great change in my life. You're a very good example of this, if I may say so, Owen. And so I think as to what my hopes, and another guy who I think we all know, James, who's over there in Kenya, is another case of a guy who was a member of this group and has gone over there. He's just done so many amazing things. You've got to ask people around the fellowship here as to what he's done, because it take too long. But that's another example of somebody who's Ian here, who has really taken heart and has transformed our little golf group that we belong to, who they always used to start the drink session after the game with a good really usually quite funny anti-Christian joke. And over the years, Ian has sort of nudged them along in various ways and spoken into their lives and so on. And they're a really different group today, and he's responsible for that. So there's all sorts of wonderful things that you see happening. My hopes for the group are that we take responsibility for each other's situation, that we invest in the lives of other people here, don't always go and see the biggest investment banker or whatever. Try and find someone who really wants to know who you are and spend some time with them, get to know them.
Any, yeah.
Thank you, Oliver, for just being here. My question is, besides faith, which is obviously very important to you, what do you think, what quality do you think you've gotten most out of in life? What do you like most about yourself in terms of values, principles, quality, besides faith?
Yeah, that gives me a huge opportunity to boast. Now, let me see. Number one, I would just say that I inherited from my mother, the Icelandic nurse, really a love for people. I just an empathy with people, and I think being kind to people, not always being edgy about your relationship with them, but showing them some kindness is something that my mother taught me.
We won't have time to complete this answer, Rob. Sorry. But another round of applause for Oliver and also for Robert. Just remember as you go out that these books are, well, they're straight off the printer, really, and they're only $20. So those that haven't read one, pick one up. But if you've got 20, leave it there. That'd be very helpful. Just so you know what happens next. Well, for those who haven't been here before, the alternate weeks we have small groups at Kirribilli, and we have them in the city, where we have it's much more intimate. We talk about the previous speaker's sermon, story, whatever, and see how it affects our lives. But we build up our own relationships, and it's very, very helpful. So anybody that's not in a group, you can see me afterwards, and I'll make sure that we get you onto the list. But they really are fantastic. We then break for 2 weeks with the school holidays. And then, as usual, Peter Caldwell will re-enter the email frame and give us his next surprise. So as we leave after this short close, I do encourage you to perhaps pick up something if you want it, but vacate the premises as soon as possible, as we have to clear all this for the PEP people. So Owen, if you'd like to close with prayer, appreciate it.
Dear God, thank you for Oliver. Thank you for him being a great friend to so many of us. Thank you for the way that he shared, no matter where we are in the world and when the world is falling apart around us, that you give us peace that's better than a good night's sleep. I thank you, God, that you have a plan for each and every one of us. And I thank you for the fellowship and community here. And I thank you for the opportunity for us as men to get real with where we're at and in a safe place, be able to draw closer to you and form friendships that help us on that journey. So thank you for Bridge Street. Thank you for the joy and the laughs and the insights. In Jesus' name, amen.